turn off so that we maximize the bandwidth for audio because I am in lovely Sackville, New Brunswick. Ever been there? Raise your hand. Bye. So I'm going to turn off my video. And if anyone wants to ask a question, Melissa, will they be able to unmute themselves to ask a question or to answer a question I might pose to them?
You'll be able to unmute themselves.
Okay, super. Hello, everyone.
Their hand.
Okay, hand up.
No, they should be able to mute themselves or with their hand.
Okay. So let me get on my slide presentation. Melissa, you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Super. So thanks very much, Melissa, for this invitation to speak to the BCKTE community practice. It's a pleasure to be able to connect. I am a part of the Toronto chapter for the Canadian KTE community practice, and also part of the national group. So this is a really exciting opportunity for us to be able to connect from Toronto to BC, even though, and especially though, I'm in Sackville, New Brunswick. So I spend probably about 35 minutes talking to you about research and impact and knowledge mobilization and the linkages between those. I just come back from the UK Knowledge Mobilization Forum, where I learned a lot about the Research Excellence Framework, the REF. I'm seeing the room. Raise your hands if you've heard of the REF. Hand up. So the REF is the Research Excellence Framework. Is for about the last 18 years, the UK post-secondary education system has had a research assessment exercise that's assessed the research excellence of research, and it drives block grants from the UK, from the national government to the universities. And for the first time in the 2014 exercise, it was renamed the Research Excellence Framework and included an assessment of the university's ability to articulate the extra academic impacts of research. And so as you can see on this slide in front of you, 154 universities were assessed. They did 6,975 impact case studies. These impact case studies were a standardized form of impact reporting that were articulated where universities attempt to articulate the impacts of research that had already happened. And for the purposes of the REF, impact is defined as an effect on, change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment, or quality of life beyond academia. So the first time the REF was a process that articulated, that required universities to articulate these extra academic impacts of research, and big money was tied to these. About £6 billion of funding went to UK universities. 20% of that was based on their ability to articulate these impacts on society. So it's safe to say that the UK is well ahead of many other places in the world in terms of articulating impacts of research. Australia has also done something like this called the Research Quality Framework. But on to this, because I'm going to talk about the Canadian context and talk about what we're doing at York University and a little bit about the research impact, or Réseau Impact Recherche Network. And I'm going to come back to the REF because I learned the REF in Edinburgh last week that I hadn't learned before, and I think it's really interesting for those of us who are interested in knowledge mobilization and research impact in Canada to be able to think about what do we really need to be doing in Canada to be able to support this type of work. Okay, raise your hand if you've seen this before. And there you go. Excellent. You're online also. You know the knowledge to action cycle. Thank you, Stephanie Glegg, for raising a hand electronically. That's awesome. So my question is, where does this begin? You know, it's a bit of a snarky question. This is a very powerful model for very few things. This is a very powerful model if you have a knowledge synthesis or a systematic review that reviews the entire body of evidence around a topic and then moves it into that's the middle portion, then moves it into the youth stage around the outside. But not everything has a systematic review. We know within the Cochrane collaboration, which is the systematic review for medical sciences, they've got about 100. They've got 100 different Cochrane panels, and I think they've got something like 1,000 systematic reviews in the Cochrane database. Campbell collaboration, which is focused on social policy in education, social care, and criminal justice, they only have about 40 or 50 systematic reviews in the database. So for those working on the social policy side, we just don't have the robust body of evidence that we do on the medical side. So again, this kind of health research is not surprising, but it's a very complicated model. Like this one, describe this model. Has a cone of possibilities on the right-hand side in an acceptable outcome space. And try and figure out, where does this one begin and where does it end, specifically for the social sciences and humanities. One comes out of education research, and I kind of like it. It looks complicated, but if you start at the center, you see that we conduct research, and then we share the findings, and then we disseminate the knowledge. I'm not actually sure the difference between those two, but then that has short-term research impacts and long-term research impacts. I kind of like that because it kind of creates this process flow that says we start with conducting research that wants to end up in impact, and they've tied it up in this sort of seashell type diagram to show that you can actually go back and forth between the stages. So this is also interesting, but also fairly complicated. So advice to all of us is that try and take a step back, because we know that knowledge mobilization is not linear. We know it is iterative. We know it's complex. We know it's complicated. But that doesn't help us if we're trying to think and articulate the impacts of the work that we do. If we don't have a framework that allows us to evaluate what we do, then we're never going to be able to make the case that we've had an impact. So in order to try and step back, this is my kind of simple definition of knowledge mobilization. It's a suite of services. This is York's definition, a suite of services that helps bring community and campus together in a shared space of collaboration. This is really important because it's not about building bridges. It's about closing the loop and creating opportunities to co-create evidence that then will be able to support innovations that create social and economic benefits. And so we say that knowledge mobilization helps make research useful to society by supporting engaged research from inception to impact. You're a knowledge mobilization or a KTE community of practice. Don't need to explain this to you, but I'm going to come back to this concept. Keep in mind that this is a process that starts with creating collaborations and it moves towards supporting innovations. I'm going to come back to that later on in the presentation. Illustrate that with this example. Heat is North America's #1 weather-related killer. Raise your hands if you knew that. No, either. Heat kills more people than cold does, and this is really important in a city like Toronto. And heat kills poor people. Heat doesn't kill people with air conditioning. And this is a story about poverty, vulnerable citizens, and heat. Activity Recreation Center is in a targeted neighborhood, a poor neighborhood in Toronto, and they phoned us up in 2007. They phoned us, being the Knowledge Mobilization Unit at York, and they phoned us up, and they just had a death of a homeless person in their community in the summertime, death due to heat exposure. And they phoned us up and said, we really need to understand better the issue of heat and vulnerable citizens. We need to understand how we can support our vulnerable citizens and communities. Do you have anyone who can help us do that? And that's one of the roles that we do at York University, is we hung up a shingle and said, if you ever want to talk to a researcher, give us a call. Because our institutions tend to be big, monolithic institutions, and people from the outside at Parkdale Activity Recreation Center look at York University and they don't know who to call. Give us a call, because we will help broker those introductions. We helped connect them to a graduate student, Tanny Gulliver, who was working in the Faculty of Environmental Studies in a similar area. We actually had some money from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, where we were able to provide Tanny with a summer job working with the Parkdale Activity Recreation Center and co-creating the research evidence that understood understood this issue of heat and vulnerable citizens. The knowledge mobilization was putting them together. Their research ended up at the end of the summer producing Canada's first heat registry. And a heat registry is a listing of vulnerable and shut-in citizens. And on heat alert days, when Toronto City Hall would open up special services and cooling stations, on heat alert days, Tanya would work with street-engaged or homeless volunteers, and she would go visit the people on the list to make ladies like this. Their fans were working, make sure water, and if they were able to get to a cooling shelter, they would help them get to the cooling shelter because it's easier to take them to a shelter than it is to take them to the hospital later on. That was the result of the summer internship that she had. She graduated in 2010, and out of her thesis, she produced a municipal heat response guide, which was how municipalities can provide services to organizations seeking to provide services to vulnerable citizens. It was referred to the Toronto Public Health, to the medical officer of health, who referred it to Toronto Public Health, who picked at it, they evaluated it, and then they referred it to Shelter Support and Housing Administration, who in 2012 released a heat registry guide. It's a guide for all of the neighborhoods and the 2.5 million citizens in Toronto that provides instructions and guides to create these services for vulnerable citizens. And inside the front cover, thanks to Tanya Gulliver and York's Knowledge Mobilization Unit. So now I'm going to flip back here. That illustrates how knowledge mobilization helped Tanya Gulliver and Parkdale Activity Recreation Centre together in a space of collaboration where they co-created the research evidence that formed policy documents at the city, and that created a social innovation, which was the heat registry that was then made available to the 2.5 million citizens of Toronto. So that's just a story of how that illustrates how social innovations and other economic environmental innovations can come when we actually close the loop between campus and community. And by community, I don't just mean not-for-profit organizations, I mean government and the private sector, anyone who is outside of the campus. So that's at York University. That was our knowledge mobilization function, was brokering of the research partnerships. I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit because these are the 4 services that we offer to our faculty, our students, and the partners so that we get them working together so that evidence can be co-created and can then have an impact on the lives of citizens. And the partnershiping that is really important in this. I'll talk about impact in a little bit, but I just want to say that acts don't make extra academic impacts solely on the work of their research. Make impacts, we publish our papers, we present our colloquia, we do our creative works, we publish our books, and we graduate our students, and all that's really important, and we celebrate that, and we support that. But in terms of looking at extra academic impacts, you will recall that the REF defined impact and impact beyond the academy. Our researchers don't make and sell products, our industry partners do. And our researchers don't make public policies, our government partners do. And researchers generally don't deliver social services, our community partners do. So if we want our research to have an impact on the lives of citizens, we will only do that if our research informs products and policies and services, and that will only happen if we collaborate with partners from industry, government, and nonprofit organizations. So that's what we do within the brokering research partnerships. We create those partnerships and support those partnerships that allow researchers and non-academic partners to co-create research evidence that can then inform cooling policy documents like the heat registry. We also support, so this is another example of a partnership. We have very deep roots with our United Way York region. And it's funny how these things arise, right? In 2011, I was walking along Rue Sherbrooke in Montreal with Daniele Zanotti. He's an amazing guy. He's the CEO of United Way York region. And we were walking along. He said, David, I need to figure out how to move the needle on innovation in my agencies. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we fund our agencies and their programs are tied to milestones, and that's really important, but nothing really seems to make a difference. How can we do something more innovative? And I said, okay, well, I don't know. But let me find out some folks who might be able to help you do that. So we held a meeting. We talked to faculty members. We talked with United Way York Region. We identified that there's an actual gap. United Ways are really good at raising funds and distributing those funds to their member agencies, but there's an actual gap at doing anything kind of really different around that funding for innovative projects. So we cost shared the cost of a couple of three graduate students for the summer of 2011, and they actually did a bunch of social asset mapping, looking at the strengths of York Region, not just the needs of York Region, and that together created that was a co-creation with the United Way York Region and the graduate students. That co-created the evidence for Daniele to create a new program that you see there called Strength Investments. Strength Investments was a program that, in addition to investing in the member agencies that Daniele does, the Strength Investments was funding citizen coalitions to address citizen opportunities. And these were really grassroots opportunities where the need was arising right out of community, but the solution was also arising right out of community. One example was the Charles Darrow Co-op. The Charles Darrow Co-op is a cooperative housing group in York Region that has dedicated spaces for people with living with mental illness that are integrated into the co-op experience of people who are not living with mental illness. And Charles Darrow Co-op got together to recognize that there's not a lot of integration amongst the people with mental illness and people not with mental illness. So they wanted to address that, and they got together and did some very simple things like an after-school programming, a community garden, babysitting courses. And what actually happened with the Charles Darrow Co-op is monitoring the rates of need in the Charles Darrow Co-op. The number of emergency room visits declined, the number of calls of emergency services to the co-op declined, and Charles Darrow Co-op ended winning a national award for its programming in integrating people living with mental health challenges. So really, and that arose from a very small, $30,000-$40,000 strength investment in Charles Darrow Co-op. Another one, the Rewilding Lake Simcoe, is another example of a strength investment that was an idea of some community builders up near Lake Simcoe, and they have they started a social enterprise where people young adults who were coming out of drug use were actually, they came together to develop a treehouse service, a treehouse company, and they would build tree houses, and we've got some compelling video testimony of people who had been on the streets, had been on drugs, and now were working for this social enterprise, building tree houses and feeling really a sense of community again. And this was part of what helped leverage $1 million investment from the Ministry of Natural Resources to look at the Rewilding Lake Simcoe project. So it's not all for the Treehouse project. The Treehouse and the social enterprise for people coming off drug experiences was an integral part, and that started with a small strength investment. So again, the knowledge brokering was Daniele saying to me, how do we do this? And I say, I don't know. That's my always first question, or first answer is, I don't know. But they say to me, maybe we can find some people to help. So the knowledge mobilization was that act of connecting, and then some of the strength investments was the social innovation that then resulted in some of these wonderful innovations in York Region. Events too. An example of events that we support is KM the AM, which is mobilization in the morning. And KM in the AM, this is an example of one we did on food security. We do about 4 a year right now. And the very first one that we did was working with young adult mental health in York Region. And we had so number one, a key success factor for events is the topics not identified by the university, but by our community partners. Number two, we have an academic speak, but we also have a community member speak, because it's really important that we create parity between the community expertise and the academic expertise. The events are always held off campus. They're not held onto campus because, again, we're really used to people coming to us on campus, so we try and take our faculty and students off campus. They're held early in the morning, and the final key success factor is a hot breakfast. We had enough yogurt and muffins, so we always have a hot breakfast. And the measure of the success of KM in the AM or any of our events is if there's a couple of folks still sitting in the corner after we shut down the operations. Those are the folks we go up to and we talk to and we support them with our services because those are the folks who found a common element. In 2006, the first KM in the AM was on youth mental health, as I mentioned, and Henny Westra from York and Marilyn Porto from Canadian Mental Health Association of York Region stuck around. And we talked to them, and we were supporting their ongoing conversation. A funding opportunity came along from CIHR for the Institute for Neurosciences, Mental Health and Addiction. We ended up being able to support collaboration of 6 universities, about a dozen community partners, 10 young adults with lived experience in mental illness vetted in all stages of the program and the project. That became a $1.5 million 5-year funded program that was called Mobilizing Minds, and has recently wrapped up and produced a Mind Pack, which is a decision tool based on academic research but identified by needs of young adults and designed by young adults. And so it's providing decision tools for young adults who are making decisions around their own mental health choices. So very interesting and important collection that arose because of an event that we support. Again, the knowledge mobilization is putting people together. The innovations that occur are the results of the research that are produced. And again, as mentioned about impact, it was because of the community partners that helped develop this, these decision tools, that these decision tools are now out in front of mental health consumers. We wouldn't have done that just as the Academy. We do that by working with our community partners. Doing this is not something that comes naturally to everyone, so we do a lot of capacity building. We hold a lot of workshops. You can see the workshops that we have on the left-hand side, knowledge mobilization, skills building workshops, and also on the right-hand side we have a number of workshops around social media. So it's because we think that social media is very important, that we can connect research to use and do a lot of community engagement as well. I'm not going to go too much into that, but it's really important as we think about this work and think about impact, we actually build capacity to do this type of work. Support. We become part of the grant support team that support our researchers doing large-scale engaged scholarship applications. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see Jonathan Weiss there. He's a CHR and NeuroDevNet chair in autism and mental health. And what we do is we work with faculty members to craft knowledge mobilization strategies and we actually use Melanie Barwick's KT planning template. We work through them with that template. We help them craft their strategies. We help review the strategies, and we've helped bring in, and I'm going to talk about our numbers next, we've helped bring in a number of these very large multi-million-dollar engaged scholarship projects by becoming part of the grant support team. So we actually do that writing of the knowledge mobilization strategies for our applicants. We've done since in the first 8 years that we've been open for business. The 323 faculty members engaged in knowledge mobilization, that's about 20% of our faculty, and we're really happy with that number. Not every NSERC Discovery grant has to result in a patent, and not every SSHRC grant has to be mobilized for extra academic benefit. But where the researcher is right and the research is right and the partner is right, that's where we find the best opportunities for knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation. We've looked at 422 brokering opportunities. That's the number of time the phone is rung. We do about 40 to 50 or so, maybe 60 on a very busy year of these a year. Not everything results in a project or an activity. Sometimes we're in 18% of the situations we're unable to make a match, and often that's because the question really isn't ready. We spend a lot of time with the person asking the question to really refine, is it a research question, or are they really looking for the right type of partner? 70% of our business comes from the outside calling in, and 30% is a faculty member looking for a partner to engage in some research. And you will recall our work has helped community partners raise over $1 million of community funding, and we brought in a little over $1 million of contract funding for projects on campus, but the big money comes through these large-scale engaged scholarship applications where we have helped faculty members bring in close to $40 million over 8 years. And this is money that then supports the collaborative research. So a lot of that money will be for students that are going out into community, or if we structure the budgets right, it's for community itself to do this work. Because I've used some interesting examples here. I've talked about strength investments. I've talked about the heat registry. We've got other examples. We've helped turn the Youth Emergency Shelter Peterborough into a social enterprise. We helped to launch the Green Economy Centre of South Simcoe, which is a rural part of Ontario, and are now providing green business services to rural businesses to help them make green decisions and enter the green economy. We're tracking probably about 8 to 10 of these really interesting impact stories. Here's the thing. You'll see that the overall quality of these submissions was judged to be 4-star and 3-star and 2-star and 1-star. What aren't in the UK? is that in order to be refable, to be reported on the ref impact case studies, it's got to be, the impact has to be based on an existing body of globally recognized scholarship to be 4-star, or internationally excellent scholarship to be 3-star, but get funded. And so one thing about this is none of the stories that I have told you today are based on existing bodies of evidence. The researcher expertise, so sometimes it's a grad student, sometimes it's a faculty member, researcher expertise collaborating with community expertise and doing some really cool stuff. And we've really made some deep impacts in community. And none of it would matter for the ref, because it was based on this globally leading, this globally recognized existing body of scholarship. I just found this out last Wednesday, and I've been thinking a lot about it. I actually wrote a blog post for an organization in the UK titled, "Is Ref the Enemy of Impact?" Because the organization behind REF is the Higher Education HEFCE, the Higher Education Funding Council of England. Funding just research. They're funding the post-secondary education sector, but they're tying their impacts only to the impacts of existing codified bodies of research, not the expertise of researchers that are a product of those investments in research. So it's really interesting that, that I think this has worked really well for REF 2015. The next REF will be in 2020, and we picked all that low-hanging fruit. The REF folks in the UK is, what are you going to do in 2020 when you've already done your report on all the existing bodies of evidence that you've managed to report on? How are you to create future impacts? And if those impacts are from collaborations that I've talked about, as opposed to codified bodies of research evidence being punted out and finding a home outside, and then that has an impact, again, that's not bad. I think they're taking a very narrow view of look at it, at the look at impacts. So my advice to the UK was that you've got a very narrow window to influence REF 2020. So you mobilize and talk about that. We in Canada have a much wider window because we haven't been hit with the impact agenda in the same way. But I think we'd be really, naive to think that it's not going to happen in Canada. I will have some form of research assessment exercise at Canadian universities. I do think that there should be an impact measure upon that, but I don't think it should just be the existing funded body of research. I think we should be looking at the impacts that can arise, not just from existing research, but from the expertise of our researchers, combining that with expertise from community or government or the private sector. So that's my little rant about the REF. I'm not sure it is a gold standard in the world, absolutely, but it's a gold standard about articulating impacts of research. It is not a gold standard about creating impacts of research. And it's a really important difference. And that's what I'm talking about today through knowledge mobilization. It's about the creating of those impacts, not just the reporting of those impacts. But what the reporting piece has done is really interesting because it has taught us a lot about standardized narratives as the unit of measurement of impact. I'm going to say it again. Standardized narratives as unit of evidence of impact. There's no number return on investment. What they did in the UK with the REF was they used these standardized REF impact case studies, and they were evaluated by panels of academic and non-academic research users. I think the REF has done a good job at shining a light on evaluation, on impact. It has talking about it. It's told us a lot at how we measure it, but I think the underlying policy directives of the REF, which was to articulate the impacts of university research, has not been wholly fulfilled by the REF, which is ignoring the impacts of graduate student research, which coming out of community service learning, community-based research, or the campus community collaborations. So my REF went over. So going, what's next with York University knowledge mobilization and thinking about research impact? So speaking of research impact, we're now these 11 universities that are working together, all of us investing in knowledge mobilization units, very different models. Of these 11, we've probably got 8 different models of how we're structured and how we do this work. So I should actually tell you back to here. So there's 6,975 impact case studies. There were 3,200 and some pathways to impact. 675 impact case studies and over 3,000 different identified pathways to impact. A common way that impact occurs, and I find that fascinating. It's almost like every time we start a new project, the pathway to impact is going to be different. So that's, again, not surprising then that these 11 universities have a diversity of frameworks to be thinking about how we support these impacts. You remember that I said that knowledge mobilization, that earlier diagram that brings campus community together into a shared space of collaboration and supports innovation. This model for us, which is our framework for impact, is just a logic model. It's a complex logic model, but basically says we do research that then gets disseminated outside the university, that then is taken up by partners. Those partners implement that into policy, practices, and services, and it's those services that have an impact on the lives of citizens. The co-construction throughout all of this, everything goes backwards and forwards, and you'll see there's benefits at each stage. But the really important thing here is that you'll see the impact line comes out of the partner space. It doesn't the academic space. And that's what I mentioned, is academics don't make products, don't produce policies, and don't deliver services generally. It's our partners that do that. So as academics, we will stay in touch and involved all the way through the process, but the actual impact is mediated through our partners. My number one, write anything down. I see a couple people are going to write anything down, write this down. Impact is measured at the level of our partners. Impact is measured at the level of our partners. And so if we want to tell the story of impact, we have to ask our partners how they have done with the research. SSHRC did an evaluation of the knowledge mobilization programming and released its report in September 2013, and they used 3 routes of evidence to identify impact. One was end of grant reports, which they found was wholly uninformative around impact because the impact hasn't happened yet. They interviewed researchers who mostly didn't know about the impacts. They could tell the academic impacts, but their interest in this diagram mostly stops at dissemination. When they talked to the partners of the research programs, that they found the really compelling stories of impact. In one case, tax law in Ontario was changed because of a SSHRC-funded collaboration between a government policymaker and a researcher, but the researcher didn't actually know that that impact had occurred. So in order to demonstrate impact, we have to talk to our partners. Talking to our partners, think back to the narrative case studies that Ref used. We count a lot of these benefits about research and dissemination, so we have quantitative metrics at the front end, but with qualitative metrics, narratives at the back end to tell the benefits of implementation and the benefits of impact. Region, we've now partnered in something that's brand new, well, not quite brand new, but quite new in terms of operations. We're working with the college, Seneca College, with our United Way York Region and Venture Lab, which is our, it's a nonprofit organization that provides business acceleration services to SMEs. And we're taking their BUILD program, you see it's called Community Build. Their Venture Lab's BUILD program is their entrepreneurial skills development program, and we're sourcing entrepreneurs out of community. And we're focusing on community identified needs, which for us in your region are youth employment and food security. Sourcing entrepreneurs out of community, do some assessment of their venture ideas, moving them into the entrepreneurship space of Venture Lab, support them with faculty and students from Seneca and York, which are also sources of entrepreneurs. And hopefully through building the BUILD program, we'll get investment-ready ventures that are coming out in York Region that have solutions, private sector social enterprise solutions to food security and youth employment. What's really, it's new, we don't have a lot of results on this yet, but what's really exciting about this is the partnership between the university, the college, the entrepreneurship of Venture Lab, and the community engagement of United Way. It's a really powerful combination, and we're really hoping that magic is going to happen out of this. And it's your turn. I'm happy to hand it back to Melissa to mediate the question and answer period. Melissa, do you want me to stop sharing my screen? How about it?
Yeah, I'm sharing. Thank you. So, and I'm also going to, sorry. Just one moment.